All right, so I am honored to host Arun Pamulapati here on my show. Today, Arun is going to be talking to us about all things AI security, centered around Databricks AI Security Framework, but a lot of the things that we will be discussing do apply to really any platform, or at least a lot of them correlate or apply to other platforms as well. So with that said, Arun, would you mind giving an introduction of yourself?
Hey Josue, happy to be here. And my name is Arun Pamlapati. I am Senior Staff Security Field Engineer at Databricks. I've been with Databricks for now 6.5 years. Primarily, my responsibility is to help our customers practice their data and AI on Databricks securely. So platform security and our portfolio of products that are within that platform, making sure customers are practicing Databricks security best practices and helping their own customers in a secure way.
What is the Databricks AI Security Framework exactly?
So if we take a step back and go back maybe a couple of years when we started hearing about Gen AI in the common media, and as ChatGPT moment happened, as organizations started exploring AI, we started getting questions from our own customers like, hey, we are using Databricks, we've been doing standard PI, and then we've been doing machine learning, and we are interested in taking advantage of these large language models, but we have a lot of questions and concerns around generally about security of and risks related to adopting these Gen AI models within our enterprises. We started looking at guidance from many standards, MITRE Atlas and OASP LLM Top 10. You may have heard of NIST RMF, EUA Act. We started looking into those, and then those were generally good references for our customers, but there's no one comprehensive way of looking at data and AI security from end to end. And also, apart from the risks, most of those standards, there is not proper or enough guidance on controls. It's important that you understand the risks, but as a practitioner, you also need to know, how do I mitigate these risks? What controls should I be placing? And it is incumbent upon us as the vendor to provide not only those controls, but also educate our customers about how to put those controls in place, right? So that led us to form a group within our own company. It's a cross organizational effort, and also consult the experts. We've been doing this for a while, both in the cybersecurity as well as AI and ML with ML SecOps. That was an effort that we did by doing workshops and doing roadshows and understanding these papers and understanding the risks that are coming out from research. And then we distilled all of that and wrote Databricks AI Security Framework, which was well received by the industry, right? Our customers really liked it. They had a ton of feedback. They felt like it was a great starting point for them to start treating these risks and the mitigation controls as part of their own practice, right? Making sure they're deploying these. And we had a lot of feedback as part of this process. As the AI been evolving for about now 2+ years now from within the realm of Gen AI, we, as part of Databricks AI Security Framework 2.0, which we are releasing within few days, within that we updated that framework to have the recent capabilities like agentic AI, compound AI, reasoning models, and the risks related to those, and also the new controls that we have like AI Gateway. So those are the new controls that we have. And we are also releasing Databricks AI Framework Security 2.0 worksheet so that practitioners can actually not just the white paper, but also use this Google Sheet and Excel sheet within their organization, make a copy of that and make sure they understand these risks and assign these to roles and responsibilities, and then filter down based on how they're using AI, the different deployment models we describe in the white paper, and then put those to kind of practice, right? So we are releasing that all of that body of work that we generated by external contributors, to whom we are super grateful for, you will see their names in the contributors list, including yourself. You went through the white paper and did a great review and provided us the feedback. In addition to the risks and necessary education that happens through this paper, we also took the time to map this to industry standards. So both the risks and the controls are now mapped to the standards that you as a cybersecurity practitioner hear all the time, which includes, MITRE class, WASP LLM top 10, high trust. So we have this mapping that would help organizations to kind of see this framework from the lens of the standards that they need to meet, the compliance they need to meet, and then find the risks that they should be covering, the controls they should be deploying. Ultimately, it is a document that they can get a great starting point and then adapt it to their own organizational requirements. I'm happy to kind of walk you through that. And so Databricks AI Security Framework is to take the approach of defense in depth for entire AI system, not just for the models, but also for everything that happens around what an AI system entails, starting from your raw data all the way to inference request and inference responses. To start with, the white paper breaks down AI system into 12 different components so that the practitioners in an enterprise can look at what these terms are when they are talking about AI system, educate their counterparts. Like, for example, data scientists very clearly understands what models are, what it entails, but not necessarily the cybersecurity team. And the cybersecurity team understands defense in depth security. They understand the necessary controls like single sign-on, authentication, and authorization. But the data scientists not necessarily need to know that. Their focus is on basically generating value from the data and then providing the necessary functionality. So with this white paper, we are going to bring all these parties, the stakeholders in enterprise AI, and then make sure they have common language. That's the first goal with Databricks AI Security Framework. And within those 12 components, we identified by studying different standards and the deep papers that are out there around research for AI security. So we identified 62 technical security risks, and then we put them on this AI system map that we created. So when we talk about a specific risk, now they know where that risk might happen, and then they know by which they would be able to know which team would be responsible for those risks and who would be responsible for deploying the necessary controls. So our ultimate goal with this is to provide our recommendations on how to manage these AI risks with the necessary controls. And these controls are very generic. Our goal is not build this reference material only for Databricks customer, but if you happen to be a Databricks customer, we will tag each one of those controls with the necessary Databricks documentation so that you don't need to hunt down in Databricks documentation, how do I implement this control? The control links are provided against each one of those controls that we documented, which are 64 controls in the paper. So in the Databricks AI Security Framework 2.0, we are releasing updated risks and controls. And then, as I mentioned, we are going to release this compendium, a worksheet that you can use so that you have full set of risks and the controls and the mapping to operationalize these controls in your organization. And then we also provide risk impact analysis who understands how to look at each one of these risks and what would be the business impacts. We documented those. And we are also giving an opinion on how we approach when we talk about red teaming for AI applications and AI models, and also how to approach and how it is different when you talk about instance response for AI systems, right? So you will see all of that in this white paper and the compendium. We are releasing, as I mentioned, these mappings, the standards like NIST 853, and you will be seeing high trust, MITRE class, so on and so forth. Is this an effort that we've been iterating on for over a year? A lot of people who are experts in this area.
Yeah, and it's quick question. So on that, so I know it took a while to put all of this together. Guess my question is, would you consider everything here to be all exhaustive of everything someone needs to care about, or perhaps say, hey, this is a bulk of a lot of the security concerns, but there could be even other factors out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to start with, security work is never done, right? Because the bad actors are always trying to find either new vulnerability, especially AI systems like Chernobyl. That means these things haven't gone through many, many iterations. So to answer your question, it is a very fundamentally well pressure tested work that we are producing here. It's a great starting point, but organizations can build on that. But the second part of your question is it all just security, and is there other effects of other happy byproducts of this work? And the answer is yes, there is. Even though our main focus of this work is around AI security, there is governance aspect to this, right? Like, overall, how do you get good governance on, your data and AI assets? We address those in this paper. And we also look at privacy aspects of the data, and we provide that as a happy byproduct of this. So there is definitely security focus, but it kind of expands into other risks of AI systems as you build them, and also how do you mitigate those other risks.
Got it. Okay.
So here you see all those 12 components that I mentioned as this becomes a roadmap. Also, one of the important things that our customers are focusing on, when we talk about AI, most of the time, what you hear in the media and what you hear in the blogs and in general, every aspect of this is discussed from the point of view of general intelligence, right? What that means is like ChatGPT, you can use that for asking questions for your kids' homework. And those systems are really good at answering questions for that purpose, right? But our customers and majority of enterprises out there, they want to do more than general intelligence. Their goal is to build data intelligence, right? To accomplish data intelligence, they need to derive that data intelligence by using their enterprise data. And you know this very well. Enterprise data is their secret sauce. Enterprise data is their, intellectual property. It is, it is their most important asset. And they do not want to, first of all, like take this approach of putting all of the data in front of some of these large language models. What they want to do is they want to bring an approach that is going to be enterprise grade offering. So in this case, as Databricks, we provide that data and AI platform where they can reason about, as they're using these models, they want to use sometimes open source models like Llama models that we offer. Sometimes they may want to use Azure OpenAI. We offer that flexibility. And there may be new models, the reasoning models that they may want to take advantage of. So they want to make sure all of that is done in a secure way, grounded in their data, the responses and the value they want to get, and the distilling based on their data as opposed to getting a general answer, right? Because general answer is not going to be helpful in the context of an enterprise because of the nature of what they want to build, what they want to automate. So that's what is important. And when you are talking about data intelligence, here comes the need for approaching that with enterprise-grade security, both for the data and the AI assets that they're using in that context. So we identified risks on all these components, so and enterprises will be able to look at them and make sure they're deploying the necessary controls. Here is the 62 risk set, which they will be able to download this both in the white paper as well as in the worksheet. And we color-coded them like in here. The traditional ones, we didn't want to leave those behind in the concept of data and AI. Those still apply. For example, the risks related to access controls. Yes, they've been there traditionally. When we are doing BI, we needed to make sure there are access controls. So it's not new for AI, but that still applies. You don't want to kind of leave those behind just because you are doing AI. And when the agents are calling back into your data, they need to make sure they're honoring the access control of the person behind that question. Like, and if I'm asking, how am I doing in this quarter in this region, I should only get the response from AI for the data that I have permissions to look at. It should not be for something that I don't have privileges to look at. And then the novel ones are color-coded in red. armed with these risks, and those numbers represent which component those respective risks belong to, right? So now you have good map of what are all the risks, where do they appear, now who is responsible for practicing or implementing controls necessary for handling these risks, and then now here are the controls. And now with those controls in place, again, both the traditional ones in black color and the blue ones are in the novel controls that you need to deploy. Now you have good understanding of what are all the control set that I should be thinking about when I'm basically practicing AI system. And do I need to have all these controls? Well, it depends upon how you're practicing your AI. If you're using external models like Azure OpenAI, or if you're using Llama model, some of those apply and some of those do not apply. If you're building your own model, there are another set of risks that apply, right? So based on how you're deploying these, we kind of defined 7 different ways of deploying AI models. And then in the paper, you will see each of these controls are connected to those deployment models.
So can I ask you a question? Just now?
Yeah.
So if we can look back, okay, so one of the topics right now that I've seen this week has been on, say, the dangers of self-hosting, say, an open source LLM model. They say, oh, it's just weights. There's nothing that could go wrong. Can you expand on whether that's whether perhaps that's a true statement, or if it's more complex than that, as well as things that Databricks does to try to mitigate any risks?
That's a great question. And I heard this number on Hugging Face. There are 1 million open source models available. So for different use cases, those models are available. So it's very attractive to get those models and planning on like using them in a given enterprise. We encourage that, like, if customers want to take advantage of some open source model, that's great, but there are risks involved. When researchers looked at these models on Hugging Face, there is good amount of backdoor models with malicious intent and malware in them, right? So as a practitioner, as an enterprise, you want to be careful how, first of all, you need to make sure you are sourcing those models from known entities, like, for example, Meta or Azure OpenAI, or in Databricks foundation models that we offer. That's first thing you need to make sure, like, that these models are coming from a place of good intention, right? So once you vet through that, the next thing is there may be some malicious code in there, right?
Some contamination from other sources.
Exactly. So what you need to think about is when you're running these models, you have the controls to mitigate those risks. Models trying to do things that you do not intended to use the models with. Like, for example, they may exfiltrate while taking the data from your data set. In the process of when you ask a question, they may answer the question for you by reaching into your data set, but at the same time, they may be exfiltrating that and sending it back to the attackers.
Some malicious actor.
Exactly, right? So with that, like, we have multiple controls within Databricks. So if you want to bring a model inside of Databricks, you can run models in multiple layers of isolation. What that means is you can make sure the model is contained within a container, and there are network controls in place where the model doesn't have reach out, and it is basically providing you the responses that are necessary based on the prompt that you're giving, and then only doing that instead of like calling home and trying to, or even like stealing your own prompts can be damaging to your organization. And as you know, with now new reasoning models with the agents and all the other capabilities that are out there with the component AI system, if you're building that, you definitely want to be super, super careful with what kind of controls you have when you're hosting these models. So, in this case, you can see you need to run these models in multiple layers of isolation, and you need to implement network segmentation, because without those things well thought through and not having those, you are going to run into a challenge of exposing your enterprise data to these models that may have malware or ill intent. That's something that you need to think about.
You touched on one thing too that I do want to expand on too. So I know you started writing this or doing this update several months ago, right? How does the concept of agentic AI, how does it either make things easier when it comes to governance around security, or how does it make it more complex?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it does add complexity, right? Because to get the data intelligence, you need to have these models interacting with your organizational data. If not, you're going to get just general intelligence, right? So the value is that agentic AI and with compound AI, you are getting the models providing you the value and giving you the decisions or responses based on your data. But it makes it not necessarily complicated, but it makes it important that you are protecting the data both from the perspective of these models that are likely sometimes ill-intended or malicious. That's one area that you need to. And also from your enterprise users perspective, you need to make sure the privileges of people, insiders, basically asking these questions are honored. So in a given platform, in data AI platform, you log in, right, as an employee. You need to make sure you have those controls, perimeter controls, so like an authentication and authorization need to happen before anyone can interact with either an endpoint or chatbot. They need to make sure they are first of all simply authenticated and authorized, right? You look at the controls like single sign and MFA and all of that. Once you're like in the platform, now you're interacting through some applications, the AI, now those authorizations, the privileges are honored when the interaction needs certain documents to answer the question that you're asking with this AI system, right? Like when you ask a model, it needs to know who you are and then pass that and then authorize with the data system or the document that is out there, which is hopefully governed by a catalog. And then you are getting the value from that catalog and the data from that catalog back to your AI system to summarize that data back to you. So when you have well thought through data and AI platform, it doesn't become too complicated. But if you're trying to either handwire or or like build in a DIY fashion or use a system that is not put together from the perspective of AI, you are going to run into challenges of making a complicated and complex wiring of these different parts to your system, which leads to here, when we talk about Databricks AI solution, when we look at the 12 different components, which was generic representation of what AI system looks like. And then in the white paper, we talk about risks at each one of those 12 components and then controls. And here is a overlay of Databricks ecosystem that is well thought through for data intelligence for enterprises to use, where each one of those controls come from one of these components or one of those products that we have. For example, when you start requesting an inference request from an application that you built on top of Databricks, you are providing an inference request. So it goes through a model serving infrastructure that we have, which has 3 layers of isolation where that model is running, whether it is your own model or whether it is one of the foundation model that we offer, has that necessary controls through that infrastructure. And then the prompt can be, you can use the AI gateway that we offer to both like filter out any kind of prompt injections that you have, or think about how to implement that. And also during the response, you want to scrub any kind of PII that may be leaking through your AI system so that you have the necessary controls, right? So we call out these in the paper in a very generic way, what controls you need. So if you're not using Databricks, you will still be able to understand from the white paper what controls you need. And if you're using Databricks, we provide you what product you can use to mitigate that particular risk and how to accomplish that particular control in your platform. And it goes all the way back to an agent is making a call into one of your data set to get proper response grounded in truth of that particular enterprise. So in that case, it needs to get the data. But here with Unity Catalog, as you are very well aware of, you have those authentication, authorization for not just for like your structured data, but any kind of object that you can think of can be governed through Unity Catalog, which can become a source for your AI model through RAG or chain of thought or compound AI system or an agent tool querying this Unity catalog to provide you the response. So here you are protecting, again, you have another layer of protection. That's why I call Databricks AI Security Framework as like a defense in depth approach, because this is what is very important, right? Your data asset need to be protected and also used, right, to get the value. So in this case, you are getting the response back here, but there are other controls that are necessary as you are getting the data into your platform itself that is going to be eventually used by your employees or your applications. You need to make sure that data is not poisoned, or the data goes through certain kind of validations, which is going to come through Lakeflow Connect, which you may have heard. Like, data poisoning is one of the well-known risks for AI system, because if your data itself is manipulated by someone, you want to make sure that is validated before it makes it all the way into your either training or through agents to get those data quality data into AI system, right? So in the paper, we go through all these Databricks product offerings and then explain what is the function of these, but also we provide backlinks to what controls are you getting out of these respective components in the platform as you kind of evolving your AI system.
That's awesome.
And then we leave with this framework where using the compendium, you can pick, you start with the use case, you need to start with the use case, and then you figure out how you are deploying AI within your organization. Are you building traditional ML? So the risk set that applies to traditional ML is different, or or has different set of things that you need to think about as far as that is concerned. Are you using external models? Are you doing fine tuning? Are you doing agents, right? So based on that, once you select in the Google Sheet or Excel spreadsheet that we are providing you with, you will get a subset of risks that we define. As I said, like there are 62 risks that we catalog. Within that, you are going to say, hey, I'm using this use case, I'm using this deployment model. You're going to get a smaller set of risks out of 62 that apply to your deployment model. And then from that, you're going to say, okay, now that I have these are the impacts that I can review. I may sometimes going to accept that risk. That means you may not need to deploy the control. Or you may say, no, this is, I understand the risk and I want to implement this control. So you need to review all the controls that are applicable to these risks. And then you are going to produce a control set much smaller than 64 controls that we listed. So say 30 controls that as an organization you come up with. So you will be able to use the document to kind of prioritize that list. And then you're going to implement that on your platform, right? So until here, it is not, even though we say Databricks AI Security Framework, it is not specific to Databricks. These are the controls that you can understand in a simple English, but we also leave you with Databricks documentation links and the product that you can use to implement those controls.
And I think one of the key things you're touching on is there's a lot of different angles, right?
Yeah.
But start somewhere. So because there's so many different components. You got to start somewhere.
Yep. Exactly.
So I'm curious. Lots of different components that are important for security. But what would you call out as being the top 5 where you would say, hey, get started at the very core, begin addressing this ones?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And the answer, as always, is it depends, but we'll go there. So the way I recommend, if you're taking something from this presentation, is that first, like, take the white paper. You will be able to download this. It's a free resource that we have out there, and then understand different components, right? What are all the AI system components? Educate your counterpart. If you're a data scientist, work with your security team. If you're a security team, work with your data scientists and business teams to make sure you have the common language, right? So in each of these components that we talked about, look at the necessary controls that are out there, right? Like, make sure you understand, you have the general understanding of what are all the controls that are there, and look at like whether this is applicable to your deployment model, right? And then with proper understanding of these controls, and then each one of these controls have backlinks to the risks, other risks that this specific control covers, right? In this case, you can see there's a huge list for SSO and MFA, which is understandable, and having like users groups, like an authentication, authorization, necessary things in there. You see a lot of backlinks to a lot of other risks they cover. And you have, here is the Databricks documentation link. If you happen to be on Databricks platform, how to enable this specific control, right? So you get that. But to answer your question now, along with this white paper, we are releasing this entire body of work where all these risks are listed with description and as a comprehensive list. And as I mentioned, there is whether this is applicable to what type of deployment model, and then you have the standards that these are mapped to, all these standards that enterprises care about, where this risk appears in other standards. That is all cataloged here. Armed with this, after studying this, right, you would say, okay, that is a lot. For me, how do I take the necessary steps? We have here the controls, entire control set is documented here. And then for each one of these controls, we have Databricks documentation links here. And then again, these controls are recommended by a lot of other standards. So you will see the mappings to respect to standards. So with that understanding, you're going to say, okay, I want to kind of get a good grip on where should I start. What we recommend as an enterprise and what our customers are doing is they take this and then look at the applicability of these risks for you, right? So you can select how you are deploying AI in your enterprise, and then you document your use case name and all the necessary things that are that you care about. And then what it does, it produces next sheet where it filters down based on your deployment model. It produces the control set. In the control set, you can look at, okay, these are all the controls that I should be thinking, at minimum, I should start thinking about, right? Because this is how I'm using AI in my enterprise. So this is the control list. Now you will be able to look at, here are the controls I need to deploy, and here is what it would take as far as, and here is the mapping, right? With that, you review these controls and see which ones you want to, which risks, overall, you want to accept. Those controls you can ignore. Which risks that you cannot accept, that means you need to mitigate. That will distill down your overall control set, right? So having said that, how practitioners should be applying these is start with your common sense controls, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. You got to do that. And then going to the data sets where do you have proper authentication authorization model? Make sure those
the right people have access to the right data sets.
Exactly. It comes down to common sense controls. And then from the AI side, do you have the foundation models that are red teamed and they are deployed in a way, we do at Databricks, how we offer our foundation models. And if you're deploying your own model, do you have an infrastructure that has 3 layers of isolation? In case of Databricks, if you bring your own open source model, we make sure we deploy that with those controls. And then once you deploy the model, are you protecting your model endpoints? Who can access those endpoints? What kind of credentials do they use to access these endpoints? That's another important aspect that you should be thinking about. And then simple things like guardrails. Do you have some kind of gateway that all of your inference requests and responses pass through, where you are filtering on the PI and PHI data, which you may not want exposed to some of these applications? So in the paper, we go through all of that, and hopefully that would help customers to prioritize, look at the impacts, and making sure those priorities align with the impacts of the respective risks.
Yeah, and I'll say, and honestly, this is a great work. This is an overwhelming but good work, and I say overwhelming because realistically, it's a lot of information. I remember the first time that I saw the version 1, right? I was like, oh my goodness! I was asked by Sunny Data to take a look at it and get my thoughts. I was like, so much, but that's the reality of the world that we live in, and with that, my personal practical takeaway or advice for folks is something I heard. I forgot who I heard this from. I don't know if it was Michelle at Databricks. I'm not too sure, but she said layered defense, and that
Yeah.
is, yeah, you might almost everything that you do is going to have some hole or some loophole that you can kind of go through. But just like the Swiss cheese, right? That upon layers and layers and layers, it's going to be some sort of level of solid, right? So build up those layers and keep trying to prove that those layers while still making sure that your business is practical, right? It's at the end of the day is there's always a lot of trade-offs when it comes to these decisions around security because of time constraints, business constraints, but at the end of the day, everyone wants to have a secure environment, especially a secure experience with AI that there's so many new releases all the time, and I think it's very easy to jump on and say, hey, okay, we're gonna do this without thinking it all the way through as to what leveraging that really implies from a business security standpoint.
Very, very well put. Defense in depth is the key, and making sure you educate your teams and continuously learn about these new risks, reasoning about these risks, and we are making sure like we have ample set of controls to provide the defense in depth.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so very much for your time, Arun.
Thank you. Also.